Good afternoon. On that very optimistic note from the Prime Minister, we begin our discussion this afternoon on tourism. We know that the tourism industry, as the Prime Minister has indicated, has taken a hit. We believe that we're on the rise. And joining me to discuss the future of tourism are an esteemed panel of experts. I am joined by Catherine Powell, of the Global Head of Housing of Airbnb. Welcome, Catherine. Andrew Nocella, Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer of United Airlines, and Martin Eurnekian, CEO of the Airports Council International. Welcome. And we will delve right into our discussion this afternoon. I would like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to speak to us about your experience during the pandemic, what your individual organizations went through, and how you view the future of tourism going forward. Having gone through the pandemic, how do you view this recovery that we are in the midst of? Catherine, I'll begin with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So we've seen travel change beyond recognition, and we think it's not going back to how it was before. People are traveling longer and they're traveling further. Our nights booked on Airbnb for longer than a month are higher than they've ever been. 20% of our nights are now for 28 days or longer. More than half of our nights booked are for over 7 days. And they are greater, they are 50% higher than they were 2 years ago. And people are traveling further. They are traveling, discovering more places. In fact, in Latin America and the Caribbean, 800 towns and cities have had their first Airbnb booking, which means their first host and their first guest. And for our hosts, this is really meaningful. Our hosts are everyday people. They keep 97% of what they charge. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, they range from students to retirees. 20% are work in health, 20% are teachers, 10% work in healthcare. And during the pandemic, for the 12 months up to March 2021, our hosts earned $3 billion US, which was meaningful during such a difficult time. But it's not just about the benefits of hosting. We've just had a report from Oxford Economics, which released our Airbnb guest spending last year in 2021, and Airbnb guests in the region spent $16.4 billion US on direct tourism activity, and that doesn't count the hosts that they were staying with. So this was spending on restaurants, on shopping, on transportation, and the report, the analysis estimates that supported over 400,000 jobs. And if I break that down for you, an Airbnb guest, for every $10 that they spend on a stay in the region, they spend $45 on direct tourism activities. So on the shopping, on the restaurants, on transportation. So it's really meaningful. It was nearly 5% of direct tourism activity. So it's been an incredibly important period for us and incredibly important for the region. And we want to continue working with governments in the region, with our partners, to bring what we believe is sustainable, diversified local travel for the communities across Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you, Catherine. So certainly expanding the benefits of tourism to communities is something that we encourage in the region. Andrew, from the airline perspective?
Wow, it's been an amazing couple of years. I think back to early 2020 when we were first starting to see the virus emerge in Asia. And our demand to and from Asia went almost to zero. And we thought, thank goodness this is in Asia, not here in the United States, in terms of it hasn't affected our entire business. But then when the virus moved to Italy, that we knew that this was going to be a pandemic that affected the entire globe. And we started preparing then. And more or less, our business in March and April of 2020 was down 95%, an unprecedented type of situation. But what I would tell you is, United's been around for a really long time, and we thought, well, how do we best manage through this crisis? And what we decided to do is be very nimble, very agile, and not try to predict the crisis to a T, but be ready to bounce back when demand came back. And what I can tell you over the last few months, that's exactly where we are. We're back to running close to our full airline again, which is great to see. Our mission is to connect people and unite the world, and we're back to doing that. And every team member at United's proud to be able to make that happen out there in the world today, and throughout all of the Americas. And obviously, we're a gigantic airline through Central America and South America. We're so proud to be back. And I will tell you, all throughout the crisis, we stayed focused on the future, on how to reestablish the business, bounce back. And in fact, in the middle of the crisis, we ordered 270 more aircraft so that we could be prepared over the next few years to be able to execute on our plans to grow United Airlines throughout all the world, but particularly through North and South America.
Fantastic. And Martin, we saw the closures of airports across the world. What was your experience during the pandemic, and what are you doing to mitigate future shocks?
Well, first, my role is CEO of Corporación América Airports. We're a company that runs airports, mainly Latin America, but also in Europe. We run 52 airports, and of course, the pandemic was the greatest unforeseen crisis of our industry.
Ever.
Ever, yes. If you ask me at any point in time if this was possible, I would have said no. And there were two factors in the crisis of the pandemic. One was people were scared, so they didn't fly. No, that was a natural reaction of the people that really crashed demand. But then there was the restrictions put by the governments, and these two things affected. We had United had 2 months of 95% down. We had airports. We had almost 2 years of 95% down in traffic, but not because people were afraid by the second year, but because of restrictions. And I think one important thing that we as a company learned from the pandemic is that if the pandemic is a great success for humanity's collaboration in science, in terms of political coordination, it was a great failure. Because the lack of coordination is what made this industry a mess for such a long time. Even as of today, when you travel, you have to think and understand and research what are the requirements for each city or country you're going. And we are almost 3 years into this, and we're still not fully coordinated. And I think that's a lesson that we need to learn and reflect on how to react for the future, because we are very happy. We are in a recovery mode, and we also see who are the winners and losers of this recovery according to the restrictions they put. Countries that have put few restrictions are now almost at 100%, and the ones that put a lot of restrictions are still struggling to come back to 2019. So I think that's a big lesson learned. And the recovery is here, but for our region it's also challenging. No? We have oil prices surging, we have interest rates probably going up, and inflation, and this will go straight into the possibility for emerging markets to create the required infrastructure that is required for tourism to get to places. No? So I think that in a forum like this one, a lot of multi-stakeholder collaboration is required to make this recovery a long-standing, sustainable success.
Fantastic, and that takes me perfect segue into the discussion on the government, the public-private partnership that is needed in terms of policy regulation, in terms of policy and regulations. Where do you think we start? What do we do? How can the government and the private sector work to improve the policy and the regulatory environment to allow for that that coherence, if you will, for travel within the industry? Martin?
Well, during the pandemic, one of my roles was to chair the airports organization, which is called Airports Council International. And I think those organizations and all multi-stakeholder organizations have to step up and really work in coordination. For the future, for what's coming, Latin America, I think, needs a lot of collaboration, needs the work of multilateral organizations, development banks, because a lot of infrastructure will be needed to support the recovery. And if we are going to see higher interest rates and inflation, they have to step in to create that gap that the market will probably leave for some time. So yes, there is a lot of room for that.
A lot of room for dialogue. And Andrew, I wonder from the airline perspective, are there specific expectations that you have of the government, of the public sector that you would like to see met?
You know, I think from a United Airlines perspective, we would like the decisions to be led based on science, right? This was a really complicated situation, but there was, after the first few months, a lot of science behind this. And, you know, we think that the decision criteria should be made objectively and based on science. And I think along with coordination and communication, you know, I think that's one of the lessons learned over the last 2 years, is that maybe in some cases the science lagged a little bit.
And from the accommodations perspective, from the shared economy perspective, is there any movement on your part to work more closely with governments?
Yes, I mean, from the beginning of the pandemic, when, you know, we all suffered, we all had that moment of seeing our business disappear into the abyss, but Airbnb really had a product that was a kind of a perfect pandemic product. As soon as people could travel, when they could travel domestically, they wanted to travel safely, they wanted to be in homes, they wanted to travel nearby, and they were traveling with Airbnbs. And we were seeing, as we saw this pent-up demand travel, we started working with local domestic tourism organizations and with governments. And since the pandemic, we've worked with over 140 governments and domestic tourism organizations across the globe to help bring tourism to the communities that need it, we want to redistribute the demand that we have, and we want to bring tourism to the community that needs that economic benefit. So we work, for example, we work with the Caribbean Tourism Organization, we've worked with Discover Puerto Rico, we've worked with many organizations. And the other thing that we've done is partner to help the travel industry understand the new trends that are emerging. One of them being, I talked about longer stays and the remote work and this trend of digital nomads, and how we can work with government to help them create remote working friendly policies so that they can attract people to come and work in their countries. Talked about the Caribbean Tourism Organization. They want to attract people to work remotely in the Caribbean. We work with Buenos Aires to attract people to work remotely in Buenos Aires. So I think understanding these trends and helping, from our point of view, we help our hosts have the amenities to attract guests to come and work. If you're coming to work remotely, you need great Wi-Fi, so we've created a Wi-Fi tool, but we're working with our partners to make sure that they have the policies to do that. And the last point that I would make in terms of the partnerships, public-private, is I agree with everything that's been said, but I think technology is such an important piece as well. And if I look at the region, I think digital penetration, internet penetration is an area that certainly from our point of view, from enabling hosting, if I think about the 800 cities, towns and cities that have had their first hosts, they could host because they were connected, because they had Wi-Fi, they had broadband, and I think we need to work to continue to expand digital penetration.
Fantastic. And with this, the trends that you're mentioning, the new trends in tourism, there are calls within the industry for a new framework for tourism. Yeah, and I wonder, what do you think that new framework should look like? And where do you see room for diversity and equity and inclusion within that new framework? How do we apply that lens to the new framework for tourism? We'll start with you.
Diversity, equity, inclusion is so important. Our mission is all about connection and belonging, and diversity and inclusion sits at the heart of that. And for Airbnb, from a hosting perspective, my title is Global Head of Hosting, so I look after our 4 million hosts, and they are everyday people. 90% of our hosts are everyday people, and we want hosting to be accessible to everyday people, whether you are a student or a retiree, whether you work in healthcare or you are a teacher. So we want to focus on creating the tools so that anybody can be a host. Hosting is incredibly important source of income. 60% of our hosts in the region host and have a part-time or a full-time job, so it is an extra source of income for them. And 40% of our hosts across Latin America and the Caribbean tell us that it helps them cover the cost of living. And you mentioned inflation, that's only going to become an increasing cost of living. So it's a really important extra source of income that's important. And we talk about inclusion. Over 50%, 53% of our hosts across Latin America and the Caribbean are women who have been, as we know, adversely impacted in the pandemic. New women who turned to hosting, who joined our platform in 2021 in the region, and $91 million. So it's very, very meaningful. And from an inclusion and diversity point of view, we want to be as accessible as possible. But accessibility, from our point of view, is also really important from a guest perspective. Mm-hmm. We think of it actually also from disabilities as well. We've done a lot of work introducing features for accessibility. We verify accessible features in our homes to make sure that our guests can travel, those with disabilities or accessibility needs can travel on the platform. And we've recently verified over 150,000 accessible features in 100,000 homes. And in the region, Brazil and Mexico are two of our top 5 countries with the most accessible features. And for example, in Costa Rica, we will work with experts to make sure that the beaches are accessible for guests and for our guests. So as we look at the framework around inclusion and diversity, it's making sure that as many people can share their homes, anybody, as long as you have a space and your local rules allow it. We want to make sure also that we have friendly regulation that allows for sustainable home sharing in the right way, and we want our guests to be able to travel in a sustainable way as well.
Fantastic. And tourism is about people. It's about the visitors, it's about the employees, it's about the communities that we travel to. So excellent work in that regard. And Andrew, I wonder, United has been leading on this issue of diversity and inclusion pre-pandemic. Where are you now? What is your perspective going forward?
It's, absolutely a high priority. And from our perspective, we have not only incredible jobs at United Airlines, they're incredible careers. And we want to make sure our workforce represents all the passengers that we carry. And, one of the biggest things that we're focused on is who flies the airplanes. And the reality is that's really a non-diverse segment of the population across the industry. And during the crisis, we keep focused on this. We opened the Aviate Academy, where our goal is to train 500 new pilots per year, at least half of them being diverse. And so we know with those type of programs that we can finally have an impact and create great careers for folks that didn't think they were eligible to be an airline pilot. They just didn't think it was in the realm of possibilities. When we know it is, we can train not everybody, but there are people that have the aptitude that just don't know they have the ability to do it. And we're finding those people, telling them they have the ability to do it, and putting them through the training to be pilots at United Airlines. And we're incredibly proud of that. We have a long way to go, but we're going to be training 500 pilots a year before you know it. And it's going to make an enormous difference in the front of the aircraft for the first time in the history of the business.
Hopefully that extends to Latin America and the Caribbean as well.
Well, it's our first attempt is really in the cockpits, but the next set of jobs, which I think we need to do the same thing, is our AMTs, or our mechanics. And we need to find more folks. It's a great job, a great career at United Airlines, but we need to get them trained, and we need to let them know that there's an opportunity. And so many people don't know about those opportunities, which is incredibly frustrating. There are opportunities, and our biggest goal is to make sure people know about them, and we can get them through and trained so they can have a great career at United Airlines, which they otherwise thought was not possible when they were younger. And it is, in fact, every day possible.
I want to turn our attention a little bit to the changing vision of tourism, yeah? And what role do you think, Martin, the transportation industry can play in shaping that new vision?
Well, one of the key issues for our industry today, as we've heard it before and we talked about it before, is sustainability. It's not only it's not only recovery by itself, but how do we recover our industry? Not only because we owe it to the society and the planet, but because our customers are requiring it. So I think that this new vision of tourism has to do with that, has to do with the future of work and how this sector can absorb a lot of people from evolving workplaces, and also sustainability in terms of environment, which our industry has a big challenge ahead of us. But I think in all organizations and in all companies at the industry, we are all agreeing that that's the only future forward. And in different levels, we are all working towards reaching that ambition, that goal of net zero, right?
At United, the same story. We are just so focused on this. We know we produce a lot of carbon, and we know we need to change that. We have the goal by 2050 as well. But we are investing in companies every day, maybe not every day, but quite often, that are looking at the space and trying to innovate. In particular, it's critical we create what we call as SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuels. And we create them in sound ways that can help us, improve the environment. And we are on the leading edge of that. I think United's bought up, more than half the SAF ever produced in the world to this date. We've made a strong commitment to this. And the other thing that we believe in very strongly is carbon sequestration, to take the carbon and pump it out of the atmosphere and back into the earth. There's early days on that technology, but if we can figure that out and how to do that economically, we can make a gigantic difference in getting to net zero even quicker. So we've got to invest in these companies, in these technologies, and these ideas to continue to innovate in this space so we can make the difference. Our customers expect it. We at United are going to do it.
Excellent. What do you think clients, both hosts and visitors can do within the accommodation sector?
So it's such an important area and something that we all need to take responsibility for and be very active. And Airbnb certainly from a corporate perspective, has a commitment to be net zero by 2030. But we are a platform, and we are a platform of hosts and guests. So we look at it in two different ways. From a host perspective, it's what are the ways in which we look at sustainability from a travel as a dispersal of tourism away from mass and traditional destinations to the communities that need the economic benefits or the regeneration, where we can revive tourism. We also look at ways in which we can actually support our hosts be more energy efficient, and can we find partnerships around the globe where we can find partners that can help them source renewable energy. And we're doing that, especially in Europe at the moment. We've got pilots going on to do that. And then from a guest perspective, it's how can we help them travel sustainably and also learn about sustainable travel. And we have a fantastic partnership, again, in the region. We are leading we have a lot of our best partnerships, in fact, are in Latin American and Caribbean region with the World Wildlife Fund. In Costa Rica, Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, where it is all about educating our guests, one, to travel away from mass and traditional destinations, but to learn about biodiversity destinations, to learn about natural ecosystems, to learn about local culture. So to go and to travel in these incredible places and to learn about the traditions and the culture when they're there. And we also have a partnership with UNESCO in Mexico where we're launching experiences. We have experiences on our platform as well, and these experiences are all about authentic cultures that our guests can learn. So we look at sustainability very broadly, but it's all about protecting what the cultures and communities need to protect.
Absolutely, totally agree. And the fact that we have to constantly educate people on what is needed, right? What is their carbon footprint? I think that's an important piece of the equation as well. And talking about sustainability and ensuring that communities are engaged, I would be remiss if I did not fit in a question on MSMEs, on micro, small, and medium enterprises. So as we look at economic reactivation, we know that over 95% of the businesses in this hemisphere are small businesses. And so I wonder what you're each doing to fully integrate MSMEs into the value chain or the supply chain of your individual businesses.
So from our point of view, it's going back to what I said initially, and going back to the report that Oxford Economics has just released in the region, which is how we bring our guests to the communities that need this economic revival, to ensure that when they stay with an Airbnb host, they spend, and when they spend on with these small businesses, with the small restaurants, in the small cafes, with the small shops. And what we're able to do, we are a tech business in the travel industry. We innovate. Last year we innovated. We had 150 upgrades to our business. We introduced and launched in May categories. And these categories are a way that we can introduce our guests through the incredible listings that we have on the platform to new destinations that they never knew existed. It's a way that we can redistribute demand by inspiring guests to find listings through finding cabins or tree houses or beachfront or lake locations. But we can basically redistribute demand to where we have the supply and where that demand is needed. And so that is a way that we can target and send guests to where the communities need it and where these communities will have the small businesses.
Excellent. And from an airport's perspective, the integration of MSMEs?
Well, if going into infrastructure, we are a very strong footprint in the communities that we serve. So at the airport sector, it's all about working with the communities around us to create a supply chain that is sustainable and diverse, and working with all these small businesses. We have an example. We run the Galapagos Islands airports, and there we bring in the community, not only for the services required at the airport, but for the retail at the airport. It's done by all individuals or very small companies from the local islands that sell their products and work at the airport, which, by the way, is the first LEED Gold certified airport in the world at the time. And it's also carbon neutral since 2017. But this is kind of a beacon that we have within our portfolio, trying to distribute that knowledge into the rest of our operations.
Fantastic. And Andrew, is there any deliberate attempt on the part of the airlines to integrate MSMEs?
A very deliberate attempt. We spend round numbers, $40 billion a year on running United Airlines, right? And obviously fuel unfortunately is our biggest expense. But there's so many different things we buy every day to operate our airline. And I think the biggest challenge we have is trying to find small and medium-sized enterprises that can fit our footprint in terms of the volume that we need. You know, if we're going to buy a cookie from a small business, which is something we've considered, they have to have the ability to actually produce millions of cookies at the end of the day. And so matching that up is quite difficult, but everybody throughout the United Airlines organization has a list, has a goal. And we look at each one of those contracts and we try to say, what can we do to change the world? What can we do to find a small company or a women-owned business that can supply that particular cookie or that particular need? And, at first it was slow, but getting everybody in the business behind that, we know we can make a big difference and we can do it quickly.
Music to our ears. Yes. And just we're almost out of time. I'd like to call to action very quickly, 30 seconds. What is your call to action going forward as far as the future of tourism goes? Catherine?
I would say embrace the new travel trends. I think they are, the changing behavior of our guests is here to stay. I think they are more flexible, they are working remotely, and I think we need to embrace these changes and partner to address the travel trends.
Fantastic. Andrew?
Yeah, my commercial will be is the world is a big place. There's so much to see, there's so much to do, and United can take you just about anywhere. So get out there and see the world, connect. We connect people, we unite the world, and there's so much amazing things to see, and that will create the economic growth, that will create opportunities for new businesses, and we're very, very focused on it. So,
excellent. Martin?
Without disagreeing with my colleagues, I would say let's learn from what happened in the pandemic and let's try to work together towards common goals in the industry and standards that work for everybody's development.
Fantastic. So let's work together. Let's learn from the experiences of the pandemic. Let's innovate. Let's travel. Let's go. I think the future of tourism is bright. You heard it from our guests. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.